Welcome to the Village Well podcast, brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Welcome back to the Village Well podcast. I'm Jennifer Casper, founder of Village Well and your host.
And I'm Josh Stratton Carlson, the producer for the Village Well podcast.
Today, it's the 29th, and it's Monday. It's still very busy in the shop because kids are out of school and a lot of people are off work, but we've made it through the heaviest part of the holidays, which feels really good.
Yeah, I think it was a great season. Everyone loved being in here. The expansion, it just feels very...
The expansion's over a year old. Everyone's still feeling like that's the news.
It's so funny. We still have people coming in here.
Oh, not knowing about it.
Maybe they come in to do Christmas shopping every year or two or something, and they'll be like, "Did you guys expand?" And it's like, yeah, a year and a half ago.
Yeah, so. I know. It's been a while, but I personally feel like we're still just kind of growing into it. It feels like a different business than it was before we expanded, and it's great. It was so busy in here over the holidays that people were really excited to come into our third place and get the kind of good community feeling that we give here.
Yeah, we got a write-up in the LA Times, but...
Oh, that's right. They did a listicle of bookstore cafes.
Yeah.
And we were at the top of the list. So
it
was awesome.
To see it.
Yeah.
It was funny, though, because the picture they used was from before the expansion.
Was it?
So I was looking at it and I was like, I was tripping for a second.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
I mean, it still looks like the store, but if you must notice there was a wall that doesn't exist anymore.
And featured our very own Tom Rubio.
Yes, so. Tom was in it. That is so funny. We're so happy that the season went as well as it did. We had a couple weeks of double days, where we're receiving twice as many books as we normally receive, shelve them, sell them, clean up after everybody in the store, and reshelve more books. It was a lot to keep up with, but I think that the staff that was here did great. A lot of people took vacation. Some people got sick. So it's a hectic time of year. Very happy that we survived it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a good one for you today.
Oh, yeah. I'm so excited for you guys to listen to this interview we did with Monique Marshall. She's a consultant who has worked with us over a number of years. And her field is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And she works with mostly private schools. She gave us a great conversation about how she got into that work. And she uses books in the classroom, books that give kids an invitation to enter into complexity about race and skin color, because those are subjects that are super important, but a lot of people are afraid of talking about them. People are afraid they're going to make a mistake, or they're afraid they're going to offend. And so that's her work. Is she goes into schools and she helps give the teachers curriculum to work through issues like this, and also tools to deal with issues that come up. She's been great at recommending books for us and helping us build out our section, because we think it's despite what the current federal administration thinks, we think it's a very important topic that people need to read about, especially kids.
Absolutely. And she talked about tools to help parents broach these conversations at an earlier age.
Yeah.
And how to make it less of an overwhelming topic to approach.
Exactly. That's what we got to do. And books are great tools to use for that. And so Shira Serjeant, our kids section manager, and I interviewed her, and I hope you guys love the interview. Welcome to the Village Well podcast. I'm Jennifer Casper, founder of Village Well Books and Coffee.
I'm Shira Serjeant, and I'm the Children's Events Coordinator. Our guest today is Monique Marshall, founder of Monique Marshall Strategy and Consulting. Monique is a diversity, equity, and belonging consultant and educator who has been working with children and teachers in independent and public schools for over 30 years. Monique has been dedicated to working with and learning from young people her entire adult life. Monique has worn many hats over her years in the school communities where she's worked. At Wildwood School in LA, Monique was the founder of and co-advisor for the 2-decade-old K-5 student diversity group. Monique is the proud parent of 2 adulting children who have taught her most everything she knows.
Thanks for that. I guess somewhere in that bio I should also put, and book lover.
Book lover. Yeah, books are such a big part of your work.
So
which is why
huge.
we've loved talking to you and having you help us learn about how to build out our kids section.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
We usually start our conversations by asking a guest to give a brief shelf talker for themselves, or usually it's a book, but we're asking you to talk about your body of work today. So can you give a brief elevator pitch for what it is that you do and what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, I would say not only my time as a teacher, but my time as a student, really my time as a learner, all 57 years of it. My focus has been on identity and belonging and finding ways to both see and understand myself and my own identities better, and then to help other folks from the littlest of the littles to the biggest of the bigs understand, who they are and who their peers are. So, the work, I think it's funny, the letters, the DEI letters that are so dangerous right now. It's the core of everything I believe in. It's how can we see one another and how can we see ourselves and love one another and love ourselves.
Love that.
That's the work.
I wanted to ask, for starters, how did you come to do the work that you do?
One thing that I tell teachers all the time, and I certainly say the same thing to parenting people when I work with them, is that everything starts with us. So, we want to learn to be the best parents we can be or the best teachers we can be, but we can't do that till we look at who we are before we're taking care of other people. So the beginning, I think, of my journey is my story, which would take a couple podcasts to tell. So I'll just say that I became interested in human diversity and identity because I was grappling with, as a biracial, black, white, mixed, female identifying human, what does it mean to travel in this body? And then what does it mean to be a teacher in this body? What does it mean to be a mom in this body? I got really intensely interested in my own journey. And then as I started to learn how to be an educator and how to be a mother and how to be a partner and how to be, I felt like, well, this is the work. This is the stuff we need to dive into. One of the things that I think I've shared at Village Well before is that a book was part of that journey for me. And I didn't bring that book today, but it was Arnold Adolph's All the Colors of the Race. And I was an elementary education major in college. My professor held it up in front of the class and said, this is the book of poetry written by a white Jewish man married to a black woman. And he had a biracial little girl. This is back in about 1989 that this book came out. And she talked about how Arnold Adolph, as an author, couldn't find books that reflected his own child. And so he wrote one kind of in her voice. And we know, with the progression of children's literature, how important it's been for folks to step into the shoes as best as they can of other folks and try to tell stories that are untold. And I really hold, people like Arnold Adolph up for that work. And we also know how important it is for people to tell their own stories. And it's so cool in children's literature, especially how that's happening more and more.
Can I ask you to go back a little bit?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
before that, to when you were growing up and you were a biracial little girl, what were the moments of cognitive dissonance or friction that you encountered where you were like, something's off, but I don't know what it is?
Yeah, great question. Because I think sometimes people think, oh, well, that child isn't saying anything or isn't asking any questions, or it doesn't seem like there's any problems, or I wouldn't want to bring race into the conversation because that might invite racism. When in fact, the things we learn about what not to talk about, what we notice about our grown-ups and what they're saying or not saying is really impactful. So yeah, as a child, I grew up in white spaces with a white mom, and I had black relatives that my mother tried to help me connect with and see, but I was really growing up in a white world. And so, the messaging that I was getting was, you are human, you are normal, quote unquote, which really meant you are white, which clearly I was not. But for those of you that can't see me, I do not look white. But there was dissonance right away around kind of the, you are one of us, because I knew that there was something different. Like my hair was different, my lips were different, but it wasn't, it was so unconscious or so pushed away, that I think of it when I think back on those days, those like early childhood into like middle school days, I think sometimes I say I grew up a nice white girl on the upper side of Manhattan in New York City, which I say because I very much identify with growing up white because I grew up in and around whiteness with the same messaging that my white peers were getting. And so I was drinking the same water.
And was it always okay, or was it negative sometimes? Did you feel bad?
In my circle, I didn't feel bad until, and this is happening today. I work in lots of schools and the phone call that I get or, the email that I get is we've had an incident, and they're race-based and they're based on all other kinds of identity. But those incidents usually happen typically around like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and then like into middle school. And so for me, in my experience, I think it was pretty easy for everyone around me and for me to kind of go, of course, like everything's good. Everything's good. And the parts of me that were like having that cognitive dissonance experience were just kind of pushed away. But when I hit those ages, what happens is, we humans are all about like, we need connection. We need belonging. We need to be in a group. And as we develop into social beings and we move further away from our families, we start to like figure out, well, who's in, who's out, right? And so I look back at pictures of me and like my best friend, Krista, who had long blonde hair, and she and I see a picture of us. We're basically dressed exactly the same. And I always I talk to middle schoolers and I'm like, what do you notice about this picture? We're wearing the same outfit, basically, because we're trying to fit in. But in those years, that's when the joking started happening, or the things that helped me to kind of go, oh, there's something happening. I don't really understand it. I wish I wasn't experiencing this. And there were things like friends saying, oh, you're like a zebra, or you're like an Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside, or, oh, and what did I do was either kind of freeze or smile or laugh along because I didn't really know anything else. The words in the book, in Arnold Adolph's book, around his daughter's identity, I didn't have any of them. So, again, kind of back to the books, like for me, it was so clear, this epiphany I had as a college student in education. In that moment, I was like, I'm a reader. I'm an only child. So I like spent my life in books. Walking down the street in New York City, my mother would be like, watch out, Monique. Make sure you're looking at the lights. But I lived for the books, for the bookstore. And it wasn't until I was in like 20 years old that I realized, oh my gosh, I've never seen me in a book. And the feeling, being a reader and loving books, and then having this like incredible, it was like almost out of body experience where I was like, here I am in this book, It just made me say to myself, yes. I said out loud, oh it's about me. And my white peers, because they were all white also, I was in a world of whiteness. I remember them just kind of being uncomfortably silent. We're all a little uncomfortably silent because I don't think we'd ever really out loud talked about race or how I had a different experience racially. So in middle school, the things started happening like that. More jokes. I was in a good, loving space, and you can be in a good, loving space and still experience that cognitive dissonance of not quite belonging, being told you belong, but not quite belonging. And then I had more experiences of like, oh, you're different. But I had no language. I had no place to really put it. So my determination to make sure that all children see themselves like fully in all parts of themselves when they are in classroom spaces, that became kind of those were my marching orders to myself, really. I was percolating them, and then boom, this was it. This was the thing that needed to be done.
What criteria do you use to evaluate whether a book offers high quality, culturally authentic representation?
I think the first, criteria, the first thing I look at is, especially if we're talking about children's books and like picture books. Well, I love looking at an author. Like, who is this person? And I don't need to know the person, but I love learning a little bit about their story. That was actually a new learning for me as a person who loved books. It probably took me, I don't know, the first 30 years of my life to even really pay attention to authors. Like thinking about Arnold Adolph and his identity as a white Jewish man and what he was trying to do, like his intentions behind writing this book, thinking about his relationship and his, knowing a little bit of his story helps me to feel the authenticity of his voice in his book, though it is not his voice. He's writing from a different voice, but it's an authentically sourced different voice. So I think there's that. There's like, who's the author? What are their intentions? What's a little bit about their background? And then, how are they sourcing voice in the book? With picture books, I feel like the pictures and the words really need to be in like relationship and like, it needs to be like a dance, like a beautiful dance. Because sometimes I'll read a book and I recognize, I don't know enough about this process, but I know that like oftentimes, most often, I think illustrators, if they're different illustrators and authors, they don't necessarily even ever meet, right?
That's true.
And yet you can feel like a synergy between an illustrator and an author by just the way that you can read the words and you see that the images are deepening something that you couldn't get from the words, and vice versa. Like you hear something in the language that you wouldn't know was there by looking at the pictures because you're hearing like a certain voice. So there's like a synergy, a dance, a relationship that I think I kind of instinctively looked for. And then in this particular field of diversity and equity, there's the didactic book, like this book is about racism. And, and there are some amazing books that are, more didactic, like let me teach you about this concept. And then there are stories where the learnings are folded into the stories. And so then it's just about like looking at character development and looking at all the things that make a good story a good story.
We were so honored to have you come and speak to our community's educators for Educators Night, and really are excited to incorporate the books that you've recommended into our kids section. We just wanted to ask you for some of your book recommendations.
There's so many incredible ones. Incredible books. The one that I just have a little love fest with is The Colors We Share by Angélica Das. And I love this book because it's a collection of photographs, really. And the author is an artist. She's a photographer. And so I also love just knowing a little bit of her story. She's Brazilian, and sometimes I think people use Brazil as a place to go like, oh, there's no racism, or, because we're like a melting pot. We're a bunch of mixed up people and we don't, we all live together. But this author, illustrator, artist created this book that just so clearly and beautifully helps to unpack the complexity of skin and skin color. She's moving us from an understanding of skin color to an understanding of race labels and the fact that race is a human social construct that doesn't make any sense, but she helps us unpack this for kids. She talks through skin as like a bunch of different colors, like a bunch of different shades of color. And then she talks about how we as humans divide people into races. And so she says, yet the way we live today, people are divided into races based on those colors and are treated differently because of these groupings. She says, this thinking is too small for a world that contains so many beautiful colors and people. It's as wrong as thinking that the world is flat. And then her next image is an image of all of these folks who she's taken these beautiful photographs of, and she has noted their Pantone color number, which, if you're painting your house a particular green, you need to know that it's C598 or whatever so that you can keep painting it the same color green. So she takes the person's portrait, and she finds the Pantone color number at the top of their nose because, our skin is not equally the same color. I believe that's what she does. She figures out what that Pantone color is. Then she puts that color behind them, and then she puts the Pantone color number underneath. So you have this page with Pantone 58-8C and Pantone 322-1C and Pantone 92-9C. And across the top of those Pantone colors, we see an Asian person, a Black person, and a white person, is what we see. But she's adding complexity to this strange thing we've we've decided. There's ways of dividing people. And the reason I love this so much is then she adds more complexity. She shares both like the spectrum of skin. So we've got, this really dark-skinned, beautiful brown human that's Pantone 322 1C. And then on the opposite page, this beautiful photographs. On the opposite page, Pantone 75-9C, this potentially albino human. They're just opposite ends of the spectrum. And then she invites us into this. Even though it seems like we're talking about color, she says, we're really talking about how we see each other and what we believe about others based on the color of their skin. And then, and I love showing this picture to kids, she shows this image where we see two people.
Wow.
And one of them, if we saw them, we would probably say, oh, that person's Black and the other one's white. But they share the same Pantone color number. And this is such a great opener. I always think of like books as doors that we open for kids. It's such a great opener into a conversation, just literally showing this page and asking little ones, like, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you notice about these two people? And inviting complexity, because this is the other thing I think that happens, like in a good book for children, there's an invitation to complexity. Whereas I think a lot of folks misunderstand young people as needing simplicity. And, you can see and hear the pictures they're clear and they're engaging and they're not complicated to look at. You want your eyes drawn to them, but the content and the way that you can look at these things is complex and deep and invites, again, when you close the book, you're still thinking about this concept of race and skin. And I think that's something that I look for. So I love books like this. None of these things were talked about with me when I was growing up. None of them. So I had to practice. So I identify as a person of color, I'm biracial, and I had to practice. So if I did it, you can do it too. So this book, All the Colors We Are, the story of how we get our skin color, it's also written in English, Spanish, which is beautiful. Another book of photographs, but so beautifully done in the way that it invites real understanding of skin color. Because again, sometimes I say to kids see differences and adults see difficulty, because somehow there's this little part in our brains that has been taught that like, the kids aren't talking about, I shouldn't bring up race because then it's going to make the kids racist or something. We're holding difficulty, like we're holding this baggage that we're carrying around race and racism, whereas kids are just noticing difference. And the smaller they are, the more they notice out loud and the more uncomfortable we get because we don't know what to do. Oh my gosh. What are they noticing? Difference. That person's body looks different from mine. Why is that person's skin dirty? Oh, that person's skin might look dirty if my skin is lighter than theirs. And I think, well, it's darker because it must have gotten dirty. Why? They're asking, they're literally like the books can, they're opening doors. And then usually what do we do? Like shut them fast. We're like, shh, no, don't ask that. Don't say that. Because really we, as I'll speak from a parenting hat, I can't help but see that whatever my child's putting out there in the world reflects on me. So what does this mean about me? Are people going to think I'm racist? Are going to, it causes us all kinds of internal turmoil. However, if we can practice talking about differences in ways that we're actually bringing up, we're opening the door to noticing the differences. We're giving language to that. It is so powerful. This particular one, what I love about this is it takes walks us down a very clear path of skin. It asks us like, what color is your skin? How would you name your skin? How do you think we get our own special color of skin? And this is a good place to pause and ask, like, how do you think you got this color? And then it just lays out. We get our skin color in 3 different ways, from our parents and from our relatives who lived long ago, called ancestors is one. And here I always pause and say, some families are formed by adoption. Some families, some of us don't know our ancestors or don't know our blood related relatives that would have had part of something to do with our skin color. And there are other ways that we can understand getting our skin. So we know it's from our ancestors, whether we know them or not. From the sun is number 2, and then from something called melanin. Melanin. And I've heard even some grown-ups accidentally call this melatonin. Yeah. So, again, the language, like when you can teach a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old that there's melanin in their skin, and then you have a beautiful picture like this, again, kind of like that spectrum of skin image that Angélica gave us, but where you see like a very dark-skinned, beautiful boy and a light-skinned, beautiful boy. And then it explains, if you have dark skin, the melanin in your body is very active. If you have light skin, the melanin in your body is not very busy, but we all have melanin. So there's like the normalizing of looking. It talks about, this book then talks about freckles, right? Tiny, tiny spots of melanin. So when I had this conversation about melanin, I'll never forget with my youngest daughter. She was 3. She was in the backseat of the car, and she was in a predominantly white space. And so talking about her skin was important because she was starting to experience little pieces of feeling different around her peers. And I'll just never forget how excited she was to learn about melanin, and how she would look out the car window and say, that man has more melanin than me. That, lady has less melanin than me. And so it got comfortable. Like that conversation that I never had when I was a kid, that I was not well practiced with, I got to practice with my daughter, and I got to talk about it with her. And then moving into thinking about how to talk about race. So I differentiate, like there's skin color and then there are race labels. And they are complicated to separate because we mush them together in our mind. And so then we think, oh, we're talking about skin. Oh my gosh, it's racism. And the amount of, I've taught a lot of young white boys, and in particular, I'll never forget, one white boy was like, well, I can't talk about race because people will think I'm racist. This equating race talk to racism needs unpacking. That like actually talking about race does not make us racist. It actually helps to unpack racism. And so in this book, Our Skin, A First Conversation About Race by Madison, she's written a whole collection of beauties. I'm pretty sure you have those here. She really helps the adults that are reading with kids. Also, she helps in her books. She helps us know how to do the reading. Sometimes we like race through a book, or we don't stop to talk about or process the pages of the book with our children, or we think, oh, we have to read this whole book to our child right now. And maybe we don't. Maybe we're reading part of the book. I love it. She opens reminding us that young children notice a lot, including skin color, race, and even injustice and racism. It can be hard to find the right words to answer their questions or to start a conversation about race. But when we don't talk about it, children often come to their own conclusions, which can include bias and stereotypes because of the world we live in. Simple conversations can help them make sense of their world and even recognize and speak up about injustice. I love this too. She says, this book is a good place to start or continue the conversation. It's okay to take a break, leave something out for now, or weave in stories of your own. It's like this author, they're giving us permission to be engaged with the book, to be part of the reading. And so just the little nod I want to give to this book that I think they do a brilliant job here. They go through how we get our skin color, but then they transition. And I have these little sticky notes in this book because I always want to mark for teachers and for parents, like, oh, here's where the transition is in this book. And it says, in the transition, after talking about skin and how we get our skin color, it says we may use color words to describe people like black and white. Sometimes we say people of color to talk about all the groups of people who aren't white. Our world has so many different groups of people, so there are lots of words we use. What groups do you belong to? And then this page has a lot of race labels, right? Like black, Asian, indigenous, Pacific Islander, African American. And I think this is so good because so many of us are like, wait, do I say African American or black? Do I say this or that? And also recognizing that language changes over time. Like that's the beautiful thing about language, and that we have to consistently, continually talk about, especially identifiers, like any way that I'm identifying myself right now. In 20 years from now or 5 years from now, I might identify myself using some different words. So, and just normalizing that is a cool thing, beautiful thing. And then she moves into skin color can't tell you much about what people are like, what they know, what foods they think are yummy, what their favorite books are, or even where they were born. Just by looking at someone, we can't tell who they are on the inside, but sometimes people try to anyway. And then here's the page. This is her brilliant little dip into understanding racism, like the little mini history lesson. A long time ago, way before you were born, a group of white people made up an idea called race. They sorted people by skin color and said that white people were better, smarter, prettier, and that they deserve more than everybody else. That isn't true or fair at all, but it's a story that has been told for a long time. And then they're like, it's kind of cool. Remember I said about the pictures and the words? This particular picture has Caucasian on the bottom, and it says most beautiful skull, Caucasian, right? In this image. What I love about this is an invitation into some language, because I don't know about you all, but I grew up thinking that Caucasian was just a polite way to say white. And I used the word comfortably. But if we think about where Caucasian came from, like historically, we can learn and unlearn and then teach our children that actually it's better to say white, because Caucasian is it's like embedded in the systemic racism that created racism. Caucasian, Malaysian, Malayan, Ethiopian, American, Mongolian, Negroid, all of those words, we've pushed those away because they're like clearly racist.
Those
but
were just the words that were identified for the different skull types, and some science that said the Caucasian one was best.
Right. And the Caucasian skulls were found in the Caucasus Mountains. There are Caucasian people, but we're using words wrong, right? We're using a word that's like steeped in racism. And then it goes on to just talk about impact. When people believe this untrue story about race, that's called racism. And then it goes on to talk about both personal racism and kind of systemic racism. And it's this, again, another great example of a book that's inviting depth and complexity, but in a package that's really accessible. And so these are the books where I'm like, ooh, they've got it. Like they've found a way, these authors have found a way to take something big and package it in such a way that not only like for kids to access it, but I think for the adults that didn't have it, that didn't learn it, when they were growing up.
We all learn so much from reading books to our kids.
Absolutely.
Knowledge that we missed in school and stuff. Yeah, this is such a big category.
What strategies help teachers facilitate conversations about identity with very young children?
Sorry, a little tangential, but it's reminding me of my relationship to math. I was math anxious, very math anxious. And it wasn't until I became a teacher and then had incredible role models who helped me to take some concept that felt unwieldy, scary, foreign, like I could never reach it or touch it, and brilliantly packaged it into like a smaller problem. My example is when I was in graduate school, and I sat in a class of 6 and 7-year-olds, and their teacher was having them add up a string of numbers in the context of a word problem that was very realistic. We're going to the park. We're bringing our equipment. We brought, 6 basketballs and 6 baseballs and 3 bats and, 4 jump ropes. And right. So she's making a list on the board. And her question to them was, how many pieces of equipment are we bringing to the park? And I sat there. I was, the assistant and the learner and in grad school. And I'm sitting there and listening to a 6-year-old say, well, I knew that double 6s were 12. And then I knew that 2 and 8 was 10, but I didn't have an 8. So I took the 7. And I knew that if 2 and 8 was 10, then it would be 12. That would get us to 20, but we only had 7 of this basketballs. And so I knew that it was 19, right? So that gets to the end and I'm just like, what is happening? And then she says, fantastic. Does anyone have another way of solving that problem? And another kid's like, well, I knew that, my way's to 10. I know 7 and 3 is 10. So I did 7 and 3 is 10. And then I knew my teens. So I knew plus 5. So I took 1 away from the 6 and I'm sitting there literally like with my mouth open. And what I learned there is this foundational understanding of how to put numbers together, ways to 10, doubles, this was then going to be helpful when you were learning about, what double 60s were. Like you could extrapolate the skills and the strategies that you were learning with small numbers, but there were actually skills and strategies. So ways in with small numbers so that you could connect that to solving bigger problems. And those were huge ahas for me, because before then, I still would have been so anxious that I would have just gone through the numbers and tried to under the desk still try to count up on my fingers, because I had never learned. No one had ever broken that apart for me. And so it feels to me like the books, like teachers of young children, that instead of avoiding these things or thinking, they're not ready, or it's too big, or it's not developmentally appropriate, or whatever we want to think to push it away, we take it as racism's a big problem. But understanding race and any kind of identity is really about the smaller package of who I am right here in front of you. Who are the little people right here in front of you? What are their questions? How can you take their openings, and how can you help them develop skills so that they can talk about the bigger issues, so that they can they have something to build on. It's like a building block process where I think most of us are trying to do these things without any building blocks. You can look around and look at the people up at the top and the people that are in charge of things. And it is so easy to see that they're missing some building blocks, some very critical building blocks that could help. Really, my dream is to go to all the places of power, whatever those places are, and just sit there in the lobby with these books, and just start reading aloud. Cause I feel like you want to gather all the people in the business suits and all the people that are fully misunderstanding the work, or they're so scared of it that they don't want to touch it, or they have created what kids do is if we don't talk about it, they create their own meaning. They create their own understanding for why that person is sleeping on the street without a pillow. It doesn't matter if they haven't talked to you about it. They're creating their own story for why that is. And the trickle in of all the messages of why that could be are not necessarily the truth of why that person's on the street without a pillow.
I do want to ask you what, in this, this era where since Trump took office again, and there's such an incredible pushback on DEI work. Have you seen that reaction in your client schools, the clients that you're working with? And what have you done to adapt or fight harder?
Yeah, part of it is my educator hat, because I'm really interested in when someone's resisting something, or when I'm resisting something as a learner. Why is it? Why am I resisting? And so I've spent a lot of years thinking about resistance, not even necessarily in that using the word, but in my practice. Oh, this child's resisting this. Oh, this parent's resisting that. Oh, you feel resistance. And I know personally, I don't like conflict. I'm quite conflict avoidant, and I'm working on that, because I'm recognizing that resistance is like all the other feelings. It's sending us a message about a need. And there is some underlying need that is not being addressed. So for me, it's like a puzzle. It's a curiosity. Like Monica Guzman, who is a favorite author of mine. She's a journalist, and she wrote the book, I Never Thought of It That Way. Something like How to Have Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. That's not quite the subtitle, but something like that, where she says a bunch of brilliant things, but so many of them resonate. One, she says, we cannot be curious if we're judgmental, and we cannot be judgmental if we're curious, right? If I'm actually authentically curious about your resistance, then I'm dropping my judgment about it. I'm dropping my own personal feelings about I don't mean I don't have personal feelings, but I'm putting those over here while I'm staying in curiosity, which also can be uncomfortable, but I really want to know. I really want to know what's going on for you. And what I've discovered in my work is that the more curious we can be about why someone is thinking or feeling the way they're thinking or feeling, again, if it's authentic, that person is a little disarmed and opens up to the possibility of at least a dialogue. Whereas, we're stuck in these very either or times where it's hard to build connection across what it feels like huge chasms of a divide. So yeah, I feel like that part I hold. And yes, in the education space, I've seen again, a spectrum of we are staying with this work. This is critical work. This has been built in our mission since day one of this school. Like, we're not budging. We're not going anywhere. And I've seen the other end of the spectrum. Well, I haven't seen in my work, because usually people, I guess they wouldn't hire me, but I've seen somewhere like heading towards the other end of the spectrum, which is fear-based, built into, we need to be careful. We need to be careful about what we put out publicly. We need to be careful about what might happen to us if we XYZ. I've seen the spectrum of it, and I just stay curious about all of it, because I'm really curious about the people that are like, we are sticking with it. We're not changing our language. We're not changing our talking points. We're not like, no. And then I'm curious about like where they're coming from, the power they're moving in. And it's fascinating. Like, I haven't seen necessarily the pattern of why some people and some institutions are able to go, yes, we're sticking with it. Mm-hmm. And then on the other end, I'm curious also about where fear is coming from. And just one like small example I think that's interesting is having conversations with people about what they're nervous about. Like, if it's a teacher that's nervous about pushback, or if I read that book, I can't imagine what might happen in my school community, helping folks find their agency, because when we're feeling scared, we're feeling like our power is being taken from us. It's scary to feel powerless. And so helping people find their agency. And I have to do another shout out for Elena Aguilar's work. I just came back from an incredible workshop with her. It was called Transformational Coaching. And she spent a lot of time talking about making sure that we, as people who are coaching others, are helping folks find their agency. And she used a phrase that I use a lot, which is finding your sphere of influence. Like, where, instead of like pulling away or even changing your language, like where is my sphere of influence? Like, what do I have power over? And again, not power over, but power with. Like, where can I find power with in systems? And one thing that I also tell teachers is we get really myopic. I mean, with my teacher hat on, I'd like to say I was always aware of what all my colleagues were doing and what was happening across the K-12 school experience. But really, no, I was deeply engaged in my fourth grade curriculum and my families and my colleagues I worked closely with and my children, my students. And I didn't know what was happening in the fifth grade or in the second grade and so in my role, one of the things that I've been trying to do is help, like, kind of shine the light on, you're, teaching fifth grade and you're afraid. Oh, look what they're doing in second grade. Maybe you can be less afraid, because again, we know that when we can collectively come together and say, this is what we do, this is what we are doing, it is less scary because we have company. That's why we don't go to a protest march by ourselves. Mm-hmm. You're like, right? It feels important to be in community. And yeah, so I think those are some strategies, like finding your people, who's with you, looking around, finding your agency, like where can I make change? It might feel tiny, but it's impactful and important. We know there's ripple effects. Yeah. And then being curious and not judgmental, and noticing when we're judgmental and recognizing, I can't be curious right now because I'm so judgmental, and just noticing that, like, in ourselves.
Yeah.
I love learning from you, and I love learning about the books that you love. And I just wanted to ask you if there were opportunities that you wanted to share for people who are interested in learning more beyond this podcast. Where might they go?
Typically, I've loved working with Village Well, because typically I've been hired by schools, right? So I'm doing a workshop at Walden, or I'm doing a workshop at JTD, or I'm doing a workshop right at these different schools, and some are public, some are private, some are Jewish, some are Catholic, it's beautiful. Such a privilege and an honor to work with so many different schools. And recently, or like kind of along the way in little moments, people have stopped me and said, like, tell me when your next workshop is. And I'll be like, well, it's at this school. You're not really invited because you're not part of the community. And so being at Village Well, I love the diversity of who's in the room, right? Like having a collection of people, educators, and maybe some folks who don't identify as educators, but who are just curious and interested. I think everyone's an educator, by the way.
Especially parents.
Parenting people.
Yeah. Anyone who interacts with children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
First line.
Yes. I always say, right, parents are the first teacher, right? And then we educators in schools are the second teachers, and we have to work together, or it doesn't work so well if we're in these little separate spheres. And so I got inspired to I'm launching 3 workshops. They are not building on, like you can attend one or all 3. They're 3 different places of focus. And I'm calling them Equity in Practice. Mm-hmm. And they're open to K-12 educators, but I've certainly worked with lots of preschool teachers. So I love it if preschool teachers want to jump on board as well. My first one is December 10th. It's called Never Too Young, Equity-Minded Classroom Practice for Our Youngest Learners. And again, I found when I was an educator, especially when I was working with young children, it was not always easy to find materials. And again, even if I found the materials, I was like, how do I use these things? So yeah, really, it's important for me to offer a space for teachers of young children to come together and also share practice, and then grapple with the things that we think are tricky, or maybe the resistance that we're afraid that we might experience. And then across the year, I have 2 other workshops, one on being responsive, especially in the face of bias, and challenging bias incidents in schools. And then another in the spring around art, agency, activism, and student voice.
Oh, great.
So yeah, would love to see folks there.
Well, so folks can follow you and check out your website to get information on those. And we're going to keep looking for opportunities to have you in here and offer your wisdom to our community.
I would love it. Maybe we can do story time someday.
Oh, just tell Shira when you want to do it, and you'll be on the calendar.
Great.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you'd like more information from us, check out the show notes or send us an email at podcast@villagewell.com. You can always order the books mentioned through our website. This episode of the Village Well podcast is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee. It was produced and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. See you next week, and keep reading.